Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tigers Down Under. Pretty happy result to talk about this week, and I've got Logan with me to talk about it.
Hi, everybody.
We'll start with the fantastic win against Bournemouth, which admittedly started in pretty predictable fashion with us giving away a pretty cheap penalty and going behind after only 3 minutes. Um, Heads would have dropped amongst the supporters at that point. How did you feel about it, Logan, and how chuffed were you with the way the players responded?
Yeah, as you said, it was a very disappointing start, but ever the optimist. I got this feeling that even though the goal came about in very disappointing fashion, it was kind of too early in the game to really get a read on whether we'd turned up or not. So I think that perhaps if the penalty had been given in the kind of 15th, 20th minute type thing with the game still scoreless, I think it might have done a little bit more to deflate kind of the hearts of the City players, but they obviously responded incredibly well, and just a really really nice feel to watching football at Hull City under Marco Silva.
And Jakupovic was restored to keeping duties in the Premier League, which we all expected last week on the podcast. And it was his brilliant ball out to the wing that really set up the play for the equaliser from us. And Mitch's boy Andy Robertson with the sublime cross in for Hernandez. So it was great to see all three of those players involved in the setup.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. All the goals that were scored were brilliant, but as you mentioned, the restoration of Jakupovic to the in between the sticks it seemed to just have a better feel to it. I don't know if it's because we've been calling for it for quite some time, and it was somewhat polarising with a few kind of Marshall fans getting a little bit disappointed about the unnecessary flack they believed he was copying, but. For me personally, I thought that Jakupovic in between the sticks again just made us feel a lot more City-like.
And I guess Man City should take a look at that and figure out that's what you're meant to have with a goalkeeper who can distribute the ball well and can make good saves. I think they're lacking in the latter with their keeper at the moment. More on the Hernandez front, it's restored to the starting lineup for the first time since November, I think I heard the stat was, and obviously his first Premier League goal since his goal against Swansea in the second game of the season. How important is it from your point of view that we can get him up and firing and scoring regularly for us?
It's ginormous. I think that we've kind of spoken about the lack of goals and the kind of difficulty that if Snodgrass doesn't score, we don't really have a hope. And I think that in some degree, Mbakani's been kind of left out to dry with kind of some of the formations we've been playing, and he obviously is lacking in the goal return. And just to have Hernandez back fit in the squad, it was just a reminder of the quality that he does possess for us. And even the second goal, when he was
fantastic.
It was brilliant to watch. But just the confidence that he was able to kind of display straight away. Like sometimes you kind of expect him to take a few weeks to get going, but to see the way that he ran, carried the ball from where he picked it up, it was kind of on the flank, almost near halfway, and just was impressive to watch. So it was great to see him back. And I think if we are to be sitting around in the middle of the year and talking about the Great Escape to some degree, his name will certainly be one of the big reasons for that being the case.
So we're level on points with Palace now, which is quite remarkable when you think that we were sort of dead and buried a week or two ago, and if we'd lost to Bournemouth, we would have basically seen that as relegation confirmed. But we're now level on points with 17th, only behind on goal difference, and we no longer have the worst goal difference in the league, with Swansea getting battered 4-0 to Arsenal. How many more wins do you think we need to target to stay up? I think sort of the traditional way of thinking is you need the 40 points, which is essentially the 10 wins, but I think that was with our fourth win of the season. I suspect if we could get maybe 4 or 5 more wins, that might almost do us.
Yeah, I agree. I think under Steve Bruce was always a firm believer in 10 wins got you there. I don't think 40 points is going to be the cutoff. That is usually the magical number, but I feel that to some degree this season is the kind of top 5 or 6, if you like, seem to have kind of asserted their authority again. I think that after Leicester kind of surprising everybody last season, I think that it was a big wake-up call for the kind of so-called giants of England. And I think that the points will be much lower. I think somewhere around 34 will be enough. So yeah, you're right. Probably 4 or 5 wins would almost see you safe.
Which is quite remarkable when you think. I think I saw of the teams that still have to visit the KCOM, we've got Middlesbrough, Swansea, Sunderland, Watford, and I think there was another one, maybe Middlesbrough as well. Unless I already mentioned them, then Burnley as well. So there's 5 or 6 very winnable games, and if we can produce performances like we did against Bournemouth, then certainly very, very achievable. If you throw in maybe a win or two away from home against perhaps an Everton or someone like that, who we matched up on quite well. Who would you say would be your man of the match from this game?
I think that Hernandez, obviously, almost on the goal return alone, and the kind of the fashion that he scored them in, was just incredible to watch. I think that Robertson was also very good, but for me, yeah, Hernandez is the key man.
And then I guess the last point from the game, the player played in a very unusual position for him was Harry Maguire at right back, and he was the one that gave away the penalty. Do you see any future from there at right back, or do you think it's sort of a case of, as a last resort, perhaps he can play there, but really shouldn't be looking to play there too often?
Yeah, I think that it's probably the latter. I think that Harry probably enjoyed his time out there to some degree, but I think that if it wasn't for the work rate of Diamande, who I thought ran himself into the ground, Harry may have found himself a little bit more exposed. Certainly after giving away that penalty at the start, I don't think his confidence would have been too high. But no, definitely he has a much better feel to him when he's in the centre of the park, Big Harry.
Well, we'll move on, and Ehab Allam, our vice chairman, had an interview with the Yorkshire Post during the week, which was split into 3 parts, and there were interesting facets to take away from each of the 3 parts. The first part was mainly focused on discussing the ownership of the club and the attempted sale of the club, and he sort of made comments that foreign owners had come to the ground and seen the protests and interpreted that as the fans not wanting foreign owners, though he did admit that there were irreconcilable differences between him and large sections of the supporters because of issues like the name change and other issues that they've had along the way. For instance, stripping of concessions, I'm sure, would be on his mind. But he has said that he's looking to back Silva in the market, and he's totally focused on that until the end of the window, and that's sort of taking priority over any potential sale of the club. And then he also talked about the fact that he wanted Silva as a long-term appointment, and that Silva was initially linked in summer, but he didn't want to have a huge overhaul of the managerial staff in the summer, but that he was happy to do that in January, which confuses me a little bit, but I guess that was his perspective, and that he sees it as a long-term appointment, even though it's initially a 6-month deal. So there was lots to digest in all of that, but what did you make of the comments, Logan?
Look, I think that as a City fan and under the kind of reign of Ehab and Assam Allam, you don't really know what to believe and what not to believe. Do you take everything with a grain of salt, or do you kind of read into some aspects of it? Look, I think that his comments are quite genuine in the form of Silva. I think that they genuinely did have him on the radar for quite some time, and I think that, well, obviously in the early stages, that seems to be a very promising appointment. And I think I touched on it a couple of weeks ago, when Mike Phelan was sacked. I was really interested to see just how quick the turnaround was for the appointment for Marco Silva, because I guess at Hull we're somewhat used to seeing things happen over a long stretch period of time, even going back to when Steve Bruce would do his business in the transfer windows. It was always kind of a deadline day shopping spree rather than get your signings early and build a squad, which makes me think that negotiations with the Allams from a managerial perspective have been obviously quite difficult. That's without even considering the problems that the fans kind of seem to be very vocal about. So I think that there was a kind of a crazy method in the madness, if you like, with Ehab Allam. And look, I don't want to be seen to be praising them, because to a large degree I disagree with almost everything they do. But if this appointment with Marco Silva does kind of turn us in a positive direction, I think that there's probably a lot of credit that needs to go the way of Ehab Allam, as much as it kills me to say it.
Absolutely, and I think To a large degree, there's a lot riding on us staying up because I think if we do stay up, and Silva did end up staying for maybe upwards of 2 to 3 years before moving on to I don't know, like a Southampton or an Everton style club, which is clearly his ambition. If that were to be the case, that would be brilliant, and it would settle us down, and we'd get some security and really build the squad. My concern though is we've done an overhaul of the managerial support staff, whether that be the goalkeeping coach, whether that be the scout, or so on. And if he does end up going after 6 months, we're going to have this summer where we've just been relegated to the Championship. We'll have lost probably our best players like Snodgrass, Robertson, and whoever else. And we'll also be looking at an entirely new managerial team. And it just kind of worries me that we're pretty much lumping all our eggs in one basket at the halfway point of the season. And if he wanted to take this gamble, I thought it would have made a lot more sense to do it in the summer.
Yeah, I tend to agree, but I also think that in many regards, he's kind of damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. If he doesn't invest, there's obviously going to be uproar with the fans. We're going to go down. The club's going to be in a state of turmoil anyway. I think that it's probably more likely that I cannot be 100% sure, but I'm kind of hoping that there is somewhat advanced talks behind the scenes with the sale of the club that kind of they know more about than what we do, and maybe it is perhaps a potential new buyer that is somewhat forcing his hand into kind of pushing towards that the survival in Premier League.
And I can certainly concede the point that in the summer when Phelan was doing quite well with results and the fans were really keen for Phelan to be appointed, that he almost, against conventional belief that the Allams do everything despite the supporters, they basically took the decision that the supporters wanted. I mean, I can remember at the time a lot of supporters basically saying that, we don't want the Allams to get rid of Phelan and bring in some unknown manager that might be much worse. We've got a good thing, everyone's together, the spirit of the club's really good, we've got to just stick with Phelan, which is what they did. So they can't necessarily be criticised for taking that decision, I suppose.
No, that's exactly right. And look, I hope that with all things to put aside with the kind of emotional feelings towards all of the poor decisions that the Allams have made, at the end of the day, you have to remember that they are kind of successful businessmen, and they are looking at the kind of football club, I'm sure, to some degree, with financial interest. And I think that there's probably a little bit more going on than what we perhaps know about.
Yeah,
and I hope that is the case.
Yeah. In other discussions about behind-the-scenes movements, there's been a lot of rumours that we'll have 2 more players incoming before the game against Chelsea on the weekend, which basically means that at the latest they'll be announced tomorrow night, which I think a week ago is when Nias and Evandro were unveiled, who we'll talk about in a second. We spoke on the podcast a week or so ago that we thought that El Abdellaoui, the right back from Olympiacos, was going to be one of the incomings as a player that Silva had worked with before, and his name is still basically being linked to us and speculated about in terms of being one of these 2 players. And the other name as the right back alternative is Van der Veil, I think his name is, a former PSG right back. Who would also be quite a promising prospect at only 29 or 30 years of age and obviously having played at quite a high level. Silva's also talked about the fact that he's really quite keen to bring in some pacey wingers because we don't have a lot of width in the squad. So what do you make of that, and what do you make of the news that we're likely bringing in another 2 players?
Well, I guess the thing is, obviously, first and foremost, is very promising. The kind of the need for bodies in the cabinet that we've spoken about has long been discussed, and we are somewhat on demand. And I think that obviously that trip to Old Trafford in the Cup was probably the most glaring example of that, when we weren't able to field a full bench. So obviously the Evandro and Nias move was to see them appear on the weekend was promising from a City perspective, and kind of just I feel like the energy levels and just the buzz around the place, just from watching the game, it seemed like the players were a lot more motivated, and just having those fresh faces, just really seemed to kind of spark everyone up. As for the new signings, you're starting to see this pattern of Silva kind of being happy to work with people he's worked with before, whether that be in his coaching staff or the new boys, with both the defenders that you mentioned. And another name that I have seen strongly linked is Emenike as well. And whether that was to come off, it really does seem that Silva kind of has a method or a formula with his football that he almost feels is proven. And to some degree, it is taking a risk bringing these players into the Premier League if they're not proven in England. But to another extent, if they're known to Silva, it's probably to kind of hit the ground running, I would imagine, is the motive that he has in his head for how he seems to want to operate.
And what did you make of the new signings against Bournemouth on the weekend? I thought Nias surprised me quite a lot. I had quite low expectations for him, but he came on and was a real nuisance for the Bournemouth defence and really could have almost set up a goal for Diomande at the end there if Diomande had read his pass a bit better. And I thought Evandro was quite good with how he threw himself into tackles, and as long as he doesn't earn himself any red cards, then I'll be pretty happy for him to continue doing that.
Yeah, I think I read one of Silva's comments about Evandro was he's bringing someone who is extremely disciplined to the game. And when I saw those flashes of some of the tackles that he was dishing up straight away, I was somewhat confused. But again, it's very refreshing to see a player like that with the flair come across and make himself very busy and as you said, throw himself into those challenges, which was very exciting. And I have to agree. I thought Nias was great. He's obviously got that pace, but also showed a level of composure on the ball that is somewhat lacking in the final third from a City perspective. And when he made that run and came from out wide and cut in and sort of ran along the byline, I was watching, thinking to myself, I'm trying to remember the last time I saw a City player do that with such ease and kind of tiptoed along the touchline. And I was really impressed. I thought that there was very positive signs for, as you said, someone who probably the expectations were, slightly low, based on some of the conflicting reports that were coming out of the Everton fans' mouths on forums and all that kind of stuff.
I also really like the fact that with that win against Bournemouth, it's obviously given the new signings quite a lot of positive energy about the club and a lot of optimism, because I can imagine coming to a new club, bottom of the Premier League, going behind after a penalty after about 3 minutes, it would have been quite demoralising for the pair of them to be sitting there thinking, well, right, what have we got ourselves into? So the fact that we could actually come back and win it quite convincingly will also, I think, help boost their confidence and their optimism about their stay at the club. Because I guess the one that always reminds me of is I think when we were quite close to signing Lennon on loan from Spurs, and then I think he was actually at the ground when we lost to Newcastle 4-0 or something like that. And it was the next day he kind of came out and backed out of his decision to come to us and ended up going to Everton. So I think these things do have an impact on players. So obviously it was a great start for their life in City colours.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Another one that comes to mind is under the Phil Brown reign when I think Alvaro Negredo was perhaps sitting up in the stands and he saw us lose perhaps 5-1 to Everton, and then we never saw him again, which obviously would have been a very large signing back in the day. So you're right, there is certainly form in that respect, and as you said, to hit the ground running and collect the 3 points in the fashion that we did was fantastic to see, and probably an extremely encouraging sign for all the new boys.
And then in terms of the outgoings, we've had a fair few clubs linked to our players in the form of a few bids for Snodgrass from Burnley, from West Ham, from pretty much any club under the sun, really. And then the other surprising one is Jake Livermore, we've had 2 bids now rejected from West Brom. For either of them, would you put a price tag on them, or do you think at this stage it's more about keeping the squad together?
Well, I think just from all of the statistics that we kind of seem to be ready about Snodgrass, and something like he's had a hand in 50% of the goals that we've scored this year, I don't think we can afford to part with Robert Snodgrass. And as we said, we're kind of undermanned as it is. So I'm really not so sure that any price, given the situation we're in for Snodgrass, would be worth taking, given the kind of financial reward for staying up. For Jake Livermore, I'm not so sure. I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, we bought him for 6 or perhaps even 7.
Something like that, yeah.
And the kind of word that I heard like in some of the articles I was reading was that it would take like 10 or 12 perhaps to lure him away for City to accept that. £12 million for Jake Livermore, I think would probably be around about his price. I certainly wouldn't like to see him go, and I think we've, even in the last couple of weeks, spoken about the regularity of his good performances and how crucial he is to the piece. But I think for the goal return that Jake Livermore gives you, which is not all that great, compared to someone like a Snodgrass, I think that we could almost afford to part with him for around about that kind of £12 million mark.
The only thing with Livermore is, as much as we've got that depth in centre midfield, he seems to be pretty much our most mobile and strong midfielder. So if I'd almost see him as sort of a combination of Mason and Huddleston, where Mason seems to be quite light on the ball, whereas Huddleston's a bit too slow, and Jake sort of seems in that just right middle mould of those two. But if we were to sell him and then be able to bring in, maybe a couple of pacey wingers and another centre mid who could do a similar sort of job, but perhaps at just a slightly lower output, that might be worth pursuing. It's an interesting one, especially because, as you say, the squad's so light at the moment as it is, that pulling anyone out of that and then relying on the players coming in to really adjust and hit the ground running would be a bit of a gamble. But who knows if we'd be able to see that sort of money for him, if we do end up going down at the end of the season.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that, as you've kind of touched on, that if Marco Silva already has a plan for players that he sees as viable replacements, and obviously that £12 million could be reinvested elsewhere, and he could see that, Jake Livermore for 2, perhaps 3 more bodies, that might be a path worth going down. But look, I think that the message has been strong from the start, and Ehab Allam actually mentioned it in his article about the fact that we're not a selling club, and we will seem to hold on to players when it's possible, unless there's some outrageous price comes in. And I think that that's exactly what we need to remember with Jake Livermore. He's a very, very crucial piece of the puzzle at the moment if we are to stay up, and it would take something special and then a very well thought out kind of plan B. To adjust to life after him. And again, when you're in a relegation fight, do you want to keep chopping and changing players and bringing in new people and kind of taking away from the core group that that we're not too far off as it is? So to replace Jake Livermore with 2 different type players, is it the right thing? I'm not so sure, but every player has their price.
Absolutely. We'll move on then and discuss the game coming up on the weekend, which is against Chelsea. It starts a run of 4 pretty tough games for us against Liverpool, United, Arsenal, and of course Chelsea. Costa will likely be back in the squad. Whether or not he starts is a different question, but he's obviously kissed and made up with Conte after the arguments they had last week about any potential move to China. How do you see us going down at Stamford Bridge? Obviously, Chelsea are absolutely flying at the top of the league. But under Silva so far, we've looked pretty assured in all 3 of our games. And that United game really could have gone, maybe not either way, but we certainly looked good value for a draw for large chunks of that. Do you see much chance of us picking up a point in this one?
Look, I wouldn't be surprised if we were to snare a point. I know that Chelsea are, as you mentioned, in red-hot form, and they obviously had the loss to Tottenham, which kind of would have set them back in some respects when they were on that ridiculous run of 13 games, perhaps, or whatever it was. But look, I just think that we don't have a reason to kind of go there with too much fear. Like, obviously they're leading the Premier League for a reason, and they can kind of hurt you from anywhere. But I just think that the momentum that we seem to have gathered in a short space of time, I wouldn't be all that surprised to see us sneak a point. I certainly don't think there'll be many goals in it from our perspective, but I wouldn't be too surprised to see a 0-0 or perhaps a 1-1.
And I guess it's interesting looking at Everton's demolition of Man City last weekend and remembering that we, for large chunks of that game, really outplayed Everton at the KCOM in that 2-2 draw, and again against West Brom for a half we really outplayed them. So you could even stretch back before Silva took over and look at the way we've been playing for almost 2 months now, really, going back all the way to the West Ham and the Palace games, for instance. So we do seem to be gathering momentum right at the right stage of the season. Looking at those 4 games then, just briefly, as I touched on, what would you expect as sort of a par points collection from those 4 games? I mean, would we be happy even if we don't get any points, as long as we can keep goal difference down, or should we be looking at least at 1 or 2 points perhaps?
Look, I'm going to be very optimistic. I think that there's 4 points in the next 4 games. I don't think they're all going to come in the form of a draw. But I do think that we can take a point against either, particularly United or Chelsea. And I would not be surprised if we knocked off Liverpool again, given the kind of way that we seem to travel against them. If there is one of the so-called bigger teams, pulling out results against Liverpool is kind of our go-to team.
Yeah, especially at home, and especially looking at their fixtures, their games around the game against us are particularly tough. And they've got games, I think, both 3 days before and 3 days after the game with us, which I suspect, we probably do as well, but they have games against much tougher opposition, relatively speaking, than us. So they'd be probably looking at our game as the game in which they would rest some players. So yeah, I think for me as well, I've sort of seen Liverpool as the winnable game out of that lot. So I think for me, par would probably be 2 points. If we can get 2 points from the next 4 games, I'd be happy. But anything more than that, if we could get a win or a win and a draw, then absolutely would be pretty stoked with that as well. Of the new players that we've signed, of Niasse and Evandro, as well as Livermore was obviously on the bench against Bournemouth as well. How would you see us lining up against Chelsea? Who do you reckon makes way out of the starting 11?
I don't think that too much of the starting 11 will actually change. I think Ryan Mason was actually, by far and away, he had his best game in a City shirt, and I would be very surprised to see kind of him dethroned, so to speak. I can't really see too much changing from the way we lined up against Bournemouth. I would be very surprised to see Evandro start or Niasse start. But yeah, I think that it'll be almost exactly the same, with the exception of hopefully coinciding with the return of having Davies and Dawson back, and then obviously I don't think Harry will be at right back. It'll be interesting to see what happens there, but I don't think many of the new boys will find themselves in a starting position.
Yeah, I think talking about right back, that's probably the main one I could see if Myler's fit. Maybe Myler coming in at right back. And then the only other obvious one I could see would maybe be Niasse coming in for Diomande. If Silva was really keen to see Niasse get a full run out and see how he can go, would be replacing Diomande on that right wing. But Diomande's work rate against Bournemouth was so excellent that I think that suits Silva's style so well, to have a player who can just run and run and run and really sort of defend when he needs to, but also attack when he needs to. So you could be right. I think the only obvious change would be Myler for Maguire in defence, probably.
Yeah, and I was actually very surprised, just touching on that Diomande thing, to read some of the kind of reviews and people slating Diomande. Granted, there were some moments of not such great quality on the ball. I just thought he was fantastic. He was an absolute workhorse, and I saw at the game towards the end of the game, rather. I think he was kind of cramping up and almost run himself into the ground. And there were rumours that people had the oxygen mask on him, and all sorts of stuff. But I remember walking away from watching the game, just thinking to myself, Diomande would have been right up there with alongside my player of the match for as far as what he contributed to the game. So to see him getting some of the criticism, I was a little bit disappointed, because I thought he worked his socks off.
Yeah, and I think based on our discussions, it's sounding like we're in agreement that basically I can't think of a single player who had a poor game against Bournemouth. I mean, you could maybe say, okay, so Maguire was out of position at right back, so he struggled a bit, but he still put in 100% effort and still looks quite good on the ball with his passing displays. And I thought Huddleston is in some of the form of his Hull City career, really. I mean, that first few months he was here, up until about that Fulham game when he had probably the game of his Hull City career. Apart from that spell, this is probably the best spell that he's had at the club. And then obviously Hernandez up top as well. So I think that's a real statement of how well we're playing as a team now, that we're not really carrying any passengers in that starting 11, which is obviously great to see.
Yeah, that's exactly right. When you consider that towards the beginning, some of the players that we were relying on were the youngsters, and kind of had a bench full of academy players, if you will. And to just be able to look across and see the kind of form and the players that we have in waiting that we can call upon, it was very nice to see the changes when Hernandez and Snodgrass were taken off early, to see Evandro and Niasse come on, and still having guys like Sean Maloney and stuff in the mix. It certainly is revitalising when you consider what it was like, only August.
Yeah, absolutely. So we also have the second leg of the EFL Cup next Thursday morning, I believe it is, at 6:45 a.m. against United. So we might round off the podcast and just touch on that game as well. At home at the KCOM with a 2-0 deficit from the first leg. Do you see that game as another game where Silva will basically play our full strength first 11 team, fully aware of the fact that right after that we have our FA Cup game against Fulham, so perhaps he might see that as a chance to rotate the squad a bit more? Or do you see that second leg perhaps maybe if we play the same 11 against Chelsea that we did against Bournemouth, perhaps it's the United game where we'll see Nias, Evandro and other signings perhaps start the game?
Yeah, right. That's an interesting one. I guess not having known what the story is with how Marco Silva likes to rotate, and obviously he's probably not used to the fixtures coming as thick and fast as they do, rather. It will be interesting to see what he goes. I'm totally not sure what he's going to do, and I think that it'll kind of be we wait in anticipation. But I think that it's probably more likely he will have a go at United and play a full strength squad at home, and then I think probably rotate the squad against Fulham. I wouldn't be surprised to see him go that way, but again, it's still kind of anyone could try and guess that, and only Marco Silva really knows.
Yeah, it'll be a very interesting game. Obviously, the 2-0 deficit makes it quite difficult for us, but people sort of saying that if we lose that, that's our big chance in the cup gone. We've got the game against Fulham the next weekend, so we could always just go on a run in the FA Cup as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Just keep the momentum coming in kind of whatever degree.
Do you have any? Do you think perhaps that Marshall might go against Man United? Obviously, he's not really had a look in under Silva so far, and there was the news yesterday morning, or this morning, I should say, that McGregor's now gone out on loan to Cardiff, which I found interesting. So we're sort of down to the two main keepers, I suppose, in Marshall and Jakupovic. I suppose Kuszak's sort of the forgotten man, but he'll be no doubt out the door pretty soon, I think, from his own comments. Do you see Marshall perhaps as getting a run out against United?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see. He will certainly be in one of the two fixtures, and like you said, I can't see Kuszak finding a chance at all, really. But I mean, it's just one of those unknown. Like Silva coming in might want to see what Kuszak has to offer, and he might even throw him one of those cup ties in the interest of keeping goalkeeping competition going. I read that he was impressed with all the keepers that we had on our roster. So it might be an opportunity for him to kind of rotate them around and see what they all have to offer.
Well, it'll certainly be interesting to see. The games are coming thick and fast from now on, so we'll touch base again after that United game, where hopefully we've made it through to our first League Cup final. And until then, thanks so much for coming on to chat, Logan.
Not a problem. Anytime.
And thank you everyone for listening in. So until next time, come on City! You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
There's no turning back 'cause you're out.